Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the second annual Student Housing Convention. It really is great to see all of you here today. We've been working in the student housing sector now for 10 years, our firm, and a London family gave us the opportunity to do some consulting work back in 2003 when they were building one of the first purpose-built student housing buildings in Ontario, probably in Canada, and I just got fascinated with the sector. I had kids who were just going to university. It was exciting development work, and since then, in that last 10-year period, the student housing building has come a long way. But today, I hope, is the beginning of sort of the next phase of student housing in Canada, building purpose-built luxury student housing, and the guys in America have been doing this now for 20 years. We've got a number of speakers here today to talk about that. In terms of today's agenda, We've got a very full day today, and we're probably going to go maybe a little past 4 o'clock to fit everything in. We've got 5 full sessions with panels, and then there's a lunchtime speaker. So, why did we decide to hold this student housing symposium? First of all, there was very little information in the marketplace around student housing in Canada, and bad information for a developer will lead to bad decisions. We think that student housing is probably one of the best development opportunities in the country. And you say, well, where's the juice in this business? Why would you want to be in the student housing business? Well, because you're going to get a higher price per square foot in rental than almost anything else, right? So I'll give you an example. If you build a purpose-built student housing building in downtown Toronto or downtown Montreal, you're going to get a certain price per square foot. If you build an equivalent apartment building right across the street, you're going to get a different price per square foot. So if you build a brand new building in downtown Toronto, let's just for argument's sake say you're going to get $2.50 per square foot, okay, per month. If you build that same building across the road, change the design the way our speakers are going to talk about today, you're going to get $3.50 per square foot. Okay? Now that comes with a little bit of brain damage. You're going to have 300-400, students living in your building. But so you're running a little bit more of an operating business than you are a conventional apartment business. If you think of the student housing or the housing spectrum, you have sort of apartments here and you have seniors' homes here, sort of the least intensive to the most intensive, right? Then student housing would probably be somewhere here, okay? A lot like apartments, a little bit like seniors housing, different drug problem. So there are really few people who understand this business in Canada, the brokers, the consultants, and things like that. And I think if you understand this market, there are big gains to be made. Now, you can't really talk about apartment development in Ontario without a very, very brief discussion in rent controls. At tomorrow's session, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail, but I think it's safe to say that Ontario's had a pretty long and difficult history of rent controls, but all 3 political parties now and the Toronto Star, Pravda, everyone's recognized that rent controls have been a mistake, and any new building built in Ontario, will be exempt from any form of rent control, going forward. And that's been the legislation for the last 10 or 15 years in Ontario. Now, there's been minimal apartment development in Ontario, largely due to the fact that we've had pretty draconian rent controls, and there's been even less student housing. So student housing is a subset of the apartment business. So when the parent business, the apartment business, isn't doing any developing, you're typically not going to get a lot of student housing developed. So there hasn't been a lot of student housing in Canada, but more and more is coming. I think just the attendance here today gives us a sense that that's going to change. We also have a lot of international students in Canada, and 100% of them need student housing. We'll be talking about that a little bit later on this afternoon. So the marketplace is growing. The marketplace is certainly specialized. A lot of you are already in the apartment business. It's a logical fit to come over to student housing for you, but there are some nuances in the business which we're going to talk about today. The marketplace is young, and for those who understand it, I think that there are many, many opportunities in Canada. Now, when I say that there hasn't been much student housing built in Canada, that would be true for every city except for Waterloo, Ontario. And so we're going to start the panel off with some terrific speakers from the city of Waterloo. And they're going to give you a presentation on from the university's perspective, from the city's perspective, and from a financing perspective. So each of the speakers is going to make a presentation, and then we'll do some question and answer after that. So our first speaker is Ryan Mounsey, the Development and Planning Manager and Urban Designer from the City of Waterloo. So Ryan will be up first. Second will be Wayne Steffler. Wayne's the AVP of Administration, Finance and Administration at Laurier. And finally, then Richard Sim is the Managing Director at Ernst & Young, and Richard is specialized in the financing of student housing, mainly on campus. So we'll have 3 presentations, then we'll come back and do some questions and answers. Okay? So our first speaker is Ryan Mounsey from the City of Waterloo. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Derek, and welcome everyone. I understand we have a great audience today from local, across Canada, and internationally. I'm here today to present about the story of Waterloo and how student housing has evolved in our city. I have a lot of presentation, a lot of material, so I'm going to cover this as quickly as possible. Luckily, you will get a copy of the presentation afterwards, so take your time and read some of the content that I will provide. So I don't mean to single anyone out, but just by show of hands, how many people have heard of Waterloo? Okay, you're well informed. Next question is, how many of you have been to school at Waterloo in some shape or form? Okay, still well represented. So those that are from Waterloo, you will actually know and be quite familiar with the student housing that has occurred over the last 40 years. Bungalow housing. That was our primary source of student housing for over 4 decades. And through a series of tools, strategy, and market demand, we've evolved from this to this. And this is a representation of the type of scale of development that has evolved in our city. And part of the story that I hope to communicate to you and to convey to you today is that anticipate change, because when the market's right, development happens quickly. Just as a little bit of background for Waterloo, I just wanted to note for our community, which started off as a small town, that through the universities locally, that has been one of the primary drivers in our economy. And so in 2007, the City of Waterloo was identified as the world's most intelligent city. Following that, the high-tech industry has just grown phenomenally, with about 30,000 workers within the region. And so we're experiencing a lot of growth, and this is a synergy with the local universities. In terms of some of the other opportunities is that Waterloo is identifying the top 20 startup ecosystems in the world. So this is all about background and context about how our community is changing and why people are investing in this community. Mike Lazaridis and company just introduced a $100 million investment fund for quantum businesses. So you can see how quickly that the energy and the businesses are evolving into our community. In terms of the region, I just note that we're 550,000. We're going to grow to 730,000. We have over 1,000 technology firms, with 50% of those firms in the City of Waterloo alone. And in terms of some of the other details, the local universities have about 68,000 students enrolled in their universities in various campuses. A little stat, this is how I spend my weekends, as crunching census data. Not very exciting, but some good data. 40% of all the residents in the City of Waterloo have some type of university degree. Tied to that, a huge population within the region go to local courses with Conestoga College. So you can see the relationship with the academic institutions in our community. In terms of being a university town, we are growing. We've just been through a significant growth period. Buildings like engineering, planning and architecture, quantum nano, and business. These are all the new campuses being built in the City of Waterloo with the universities, and this is what's helping fuel the optimism in our community. During the last 5 years, just to cut to some basic numbers, I sat on the site plan review committee, and we've crunched out $1.8 billion of construction value during the last 5 years in a city of 130,000 people. We have 30,000 students in our community, so you can kind of get a sense of the scale of $1.8 billion. 375 million have been in actual university buildings during that 5-year stretch. Related, 350 million have been in the uptown core. Part of the reason why you're here is that we had 1,600 student housing units created over those 5 years. Now, when you think of a unit, there's typically 5 beds per unit. So you're in the range of about 6,000 to 7,000 beds in 5 years. We have over 1,500 units under review right now. So that's over 3,000 units being developed or have been developed in 5 years' time. In terms of a little bit more of our context, just very briefly, we started off as an insurance town and an industrial town. We evolved with the universities, with Wilfrid Laurier, University of Waterloo, and Conestoga College. Then the universities start to really expand and develop programs, things like the Accelerator Center, which have over 75 businesses that have helped fuel the economy. 83% of those businesses have stayed local. Blackberry Lab, I'd be remiss if I don't note that some of the best talent coming from our universities are going to that institution and business. And we've invested in our cultural spaces, things like park spaces, research institutes. And just to tie up the background context, this community has been a suburban community. Anyone who knows of Waterloo thinks of it as a smaller community, which it is, low-rise housing, which it has, but we are changing. Part of this change results in growth management, and this ties into student housing, by the way. It's not a lecture, it's more to provide the context, is that we have an established growth boundary that limits the amount of where we can grow. And so Waterloo is the smallest city in the region. And so we have to grow up, and that's part of the reason why you see all these high-rise buildings being developed in our community, because we don't have a lot of greenfield land. The region has also received funding in 2017 to start building a light rail transit system in our community. That's a game changer for us. So where investment in dollars are going to locate, student housing is one piece, but development overall is changing. And this LRT system is going to help fuel and add $818 million of construction into our community. In terms of the city, our game changer was in 2004. We went from a suburban greenfield community to a planned nodes and corridor planning model. This was a game changer, and the province has followed this after Waterloo in the sense that we were thinking about how do you grow up, put development on major roads, major intersections, and facilitate development. I just note that through this massive study exercise, that we were ahead of the curve, and this is about the lessons learned for Waterloo, is that you need to have all the tools in place if you're going to open up development on these major corridors. I'll just talk a moment about the Uptown. To make good use of this heightened density policies, these are the type of projects that you'll see in the Uptown core, making use of those policies. You'll see that in the presentation when you can look at it afterwards, but you can get a sense of the scale of what's happening. This is a type of development that we're seeing just around the core as a condo project, podium base, tower form. And the reason why I introduce this is it's going to provide a model for student housing that we're starting to see evolve in our community. Public spaces, this is all about activity and life, and so we invest in that, and it's for all people, including students. The tools, this is really what the municipality has done to facilitate growth. It's about nodes and corridor policies with heightened density. It's about allowing more development on the major roads, and it's about providing design guidelines to help shape and guide the type of development that we're seeing. But there has been some bumps along the way, and you always have to monitor the tools to see how they can be done better and to facilitate development. Just as a note, a perfect project in Waterloo without any hiccups is about 5 to 6 months to go from the very start to a building permit issuance. They're now taking about 8 months' time to run a project through Waterloo because of the level of complexity, and you'll see this in some projects. This is our zoning map. I'm not going to spend much time on this other than to note that we used to go off of a density model of units per hectare. So you could have up to 250 units per hectare. That's over 1,200 beds on a 1 hectare parcel. So when you look at the math in terms of how we calculate density, it's very important, and I can answer some questions after the presentation about zoning and density. we're now shifting towards a beds per hectare unit, and that's a really important point for the City of Waterloo about how we're changing. Urban design, I just note that it's such an important tool to help guide development. I'm not going to spend any time on this other than to note that you need to have the tools in place to help create a vision of how projects should look. And there was a couple years gap between our policies and guidelines, and you'll see the evolution of projects in Waterloo. These are the design guidelines. I went through a full public consultation process, and part of my presentation is about working together, and this is an example of how we work together. So, the meat of the presentation. This was student housing under the new policies but before design guidelines. You can get a sense of it. It could be housing that you would see in most communities. They typically have anywhere from 3 units to about 18 units, and a little boxy in form. They serve a function, and they house and provide new student housing accommodations for our growing community. After the design guidelines, you'll see some shifts in the design of the buildings, more modern building materials, larger windows, more amenities, and this is about the evolution of development in student housing in Waterloo. What the design guidelines and policies also talk about is trying to promote creative design solutions. And in Waterloo, that's very important for our community. Projects are adding public art to their projects and trying to give back to the community. Experimenting with new materials and new aesthetics, and that is part of the evolution of our community. In terms of tall buildings, these are just some renderings shown of projects approved or under construction. And what you'll see is that most of these are 17 to 21 stories in height. You will see that they range anywhere from about 50 to 80 units. And they now include more than 5 bedroom units in the sense that developers are now adding in 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, which is so important to Waterloo. But this is the scale of high-rise development in Waterloo. And we have on complete blocks anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 beds being developed on blocks within our city. Tools. To make student housing work, we need better tools. And by allowing architectural projections and other relief to facilitate student housing projects, this is something that's in place because if you don't offer it or provide it, it's not going to happen. And that's a lesson learned for our community. In terms of context plans, what the city has done to help facilitate development is institute new processes to say, look, what's around your neighborhood, you as developer, submit plans and look at the type of development and do a better job. And these just show some examples of contextual plans and the quality of development that we're starting to see. More contextual plans, the architecture tries to repeat and enhance what's happening on the street. This came in as a student housing project out of the blocks. We said, well, look at the surrounding context. Technology. Can you evolve your concept a little bit more, please? Okay, there you go. Final form, there you go. So it's about working together and understanding where your starting point is, and the sooner that you can get to the starting point, the quicker you can build. I understand that most student housing works after a September 1st start date, so timing's pretty important. A couple other projects to talk about as the projects are getting larger, and in terms of looking at high quality, large scale development, we're seeing sites with 2, 3, 4 towers on them. Northdale, in terms of understanding how the city's evolving, a massive change in our planning tools and policies that are trying to change the way student housing is being developed as a form and as a use. This has introduced mixed-use buildings within this neighborhood. The Sage 1 project is an early model showing how do you get investment housing with mixed uses on the ground. And again, to quickly evolve over a year, this is how it's changing. That's new evolution of student housing and investment in Waterloo, with some professional living spaces integrated in with this concept. In terms of another project that's gone through some changes and has done a wonderful evolution, in terms of looking at large-scale development starting off in this way and then evolving into a site with multiple buildings. These are large-scale projects that are changing our landscape. In terms of trends, and I only have a couple slides left, what we have seen over the last couple of years, which has been a lot of investment, about $600 million in construction activity in 4 years related directly to student housing. That's the amount of investment in construction value in 4 years in our community. Is that driveways under the building? We never used to see that with the small scale projects. It's about maximizing land. So you need tools to allow that. In terms of allowing more expressive buildings, we'll put zoning in place so that you can allow for building articulation and design. Promoting modern building designs. Being modern is a good thing, but you have to have the right tools to support that. Larger window openings. A lot of the older buildings, by old I mean 5 years old, is very small windows. And there's security reasons, there's safety reasons, there's structural reasons, but try to open up the building, and that's been a success in Waterloo. Promoting and permitting mixed-use buildings. That's been the biggest game change in our community in the last year or two. And promoting sustainable design, but that comes with a catch. You gotta provide some incentives, and that's being done in the Northdale community. Try and provide landscaping. Students wear and tear buildings, there's no question about it. So we have to learn as a municipality, say, what are your needs, and work together, but provide the tools in place to get better quality landscaping, and it is happening. And providing more amenities. That's an area of opportunity, and our market's becoming more competitive with that. Last couple slides. Challenges, for sure. I can answer these in questions, but I think that we've created and found some solutions to deal with a lot of our challenges, and it's about our next wave of development, and our tools are better able to accommodate more growth and higher density growth, but it's about lessons learned and a lot of experimentation about saying, how do you get parking to work? How do you get the right balance with beds per unit? And those came through largely policies. In terms of the observations, we are a little unique as a small community. 1 in 5 person in Waterloo is a university student. That's a very high percentage. I think in terms of us expanding on limited land growth and limited land base, what we've learned is that the development industry moves so much quicker than the municipal processes, and that's something that you have to be prepared for. Industry reacts and changes, and you as student housing investors are ahead of the curve, and we actually learn from you in terms of some of the amenities that you're providing, but we need to create a balanced framework to support good development. The market, understand the student housing market. If you build it, they will come, but at a certain point, there's so much supply out there potentially, is that you have to provide good quality living accommodations, and it is about the amenities. And the projects that I just quickly showed you represent how we're evolving with the amenities. Technology, building construction technology, working with the industry to how to make buildings look good, that has been one of the most challenging parts of our processes. And designing for flexibility. I think that's just something we have to always keep in mind. Is it a long-term student housing project, or does it evolve to something else over time, like mixed use, like condo projects and future sales down the road? So my last slide is all about being proactive. Within 5 years, our community is completely transformed, and with a tremendous amount of effort, and I'm just touching the iceberg right here in terms of what's involved to do a wholesale change, is about you need the tools in place. You need to look at infrastructure. One of the biggest challenges in our community was planning for infrastructure and investing and prioritizing in areas that need upgrades because the development happens so quickly. In terms of the model can change. Everyone gets complacent about a model, and what I hope to convey to you today is that the model is changing, but you need to work with the partners to say, let's do a better job. And I think lastly, it's about just working together. Like I said, there was a lot of information. I can answer a lot of technical questions, but this is the story of Waterloo and how we started from a bungalow to a 25-story student housing project and adding about 8,000 beds into our community in a very short period of time. So I hope that's some insight. Happy to answer your questions and to allow the other speakers to answer much more about this whole process that's evolving in Waterloo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan.